Welcome to this very special presentation. We will present the results of an extensive survey taken of our membership earlier in the year. It's the 2020 survey results of our membership regarding our strategic plan, specifically congregational care. Every 3 years we take this survey, and this is the year. This is 2020, and we will discuss those results. In our strategic plan, we have an outcome-based plan which has indicators as to how we're attaining to and receiving these outcomes. And there were actually 21 different indicators which could only be ascertained by a member survey. And that's what we'll be going through today. You'll find this to be very interesting. I have found these results to be very eye-opening and very, very helpful as to what we'll be doing as a church from here on out. So today we have a very special guest. This is a special guest on various levels to us personally and professionally. We have Julie Brown, who will present this. She has been doing this for the last 12 years for the United Church of God, making this presentation. She comes here every 3 years, actually more often than that, but she makes a very, very detailed presentation, and that's what we'll be hearing today. She's a member of the United Church of God congregation in Philadelphia, and she and her husband serve as deacon and deaconess. She's currently the institutional market leader for Johnson Controls. And in this role, she uses data analytics, including surveys, to help lead offerings for healthcare, higher education, and K through 12 markets in North America. Johnson Controls is an international, multinational conglomerate, which is headquartered in Milwaukee and in Cork, Ireland. It has 105,000 employees and 2,000 outlets, and they work across 6 continents. Before this, Julie was vice president of a boutique market research firm and very well acquainted with surveys and what surveys do. So she's been involved in supporting us here for the last 12 years. So I want to welcome Julie Brown Zoots, or Julie Zoots Brown.
Thank you so much, Vic. Okay. It's really a pleasure to be here. We'll elbow bump. That's the new thing. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome, and especially to those of you, there's a few I know joining online. This is, I always see this as a real privilege and to some degree a responsibility when we have our brethren, our members of the household of faith, sharing their perspective on their experience with the church and where they'd like to see improvements, and just being really careful and transparent on that as we report this out, respecting a lot of the information that they've given us, but making sure that it's highlighted. As we get started, I also want to provide special thanks. Lisa Fenchel really helped kind of shepherd some of this. We also had Nathan Ekema do a lot of the quantitative computing on this, and appreciate his expertise. And certainly, as someone who's been doing this since 2008, have noticed and been grateful for Mark Welch and the updates that he's been giving on some of the data since this report came out. So with that, let's walk right into the data. And for those of you that are online, I believe there's a way to pass through questions. So please speak up. I'll try to repeat them so that we've got questions coming through so that this is as clear as possible. So I want to start off, first of all, by just a high-level element of the survey itself. This year we had 3,045 valid responses. Every year we do quality control on the data. Sometimes internet connections impact people. You run in with duplicates. You look for something called speeders. So if you get a response and the average amount of time that it took people to take the survey was 18 minutes, and you find someone did the entire survey in 90 seconds, you know, they probably weren't reading the question. So we take those questions out. But this actually gives us a wonderful base of information based upon the church population. One of the things that happened this year, and I was involved in computing it but not in actually designing the survey, is it was shifted from the last survey in 2017. So normally when I do this presentation, I can provide comparisons, but the shift that happened in the reworking of the questions makes that not possible with the data that we have going forward today. The scale that we used was typically on a scale of 1 to 7 or 1 to 5, where the 5 or the 7 was high or very pleased or exceptional, and 1 would be a low score. We also, as you'll see on the individual slides, we will have what's called an N. That's the number of people that responded. So even though we've got over 3,000 responses, on any given question, you might have only 2,900 actually answered that particular question. So that's what that means. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the metrics on weighted average and margin of error. So getting right into the attendee results and some of the overall findings as a preview to what we have today. The first one of the striking differences this year is that 14% of the respondents didn't indicate what congregation they attended. While we asked for what congregation, that was not a mandatory field. If they weren't comfortable doing that, they could have left it blank and kept going. But that's a change over prior years to have that many of them. While past surveys have trended towards more favorable scoring, this year there's a particular high level of that favorable aura in the data in all of the results. And what that means is, and this has been true since the beginning, since 2008, we tend to be very positive in how we give our feedback. So, when we ask for things versus if I were to do a survey externally on how satisfied were you with service, our scores compared to general population are going to be high. This year's survey had even more of that, and I'll explain where that comes out a little bit farther. We find that members continue to be hesitant around directly kind of promoting or proselytizing. That's just an area that we see as some development or things that they give comments on. They do have a very high confidence in their understanding around fundamental beliefs, which is excellent to see in the data. One of the things that's new this year is the usage of webcasts and online resources. This has gone up, but one of the things that really struck me in going through the data is just how many members really rely on webcasts for weekly church services. When you remember that this survey was administered back in January, so this is before the pandemic, this is before the economic crisis, this is before a lot of the challenges and the heartbreaking things that are going on around the world right now. Even in those times, we had lots of members who really saw that as an important kind of spiritual lifeline into their weekly Sabbath church services. I was talking about the fields and the number of participants who didn't indicate what congregation they attended. We also always take extra steps to actually preserve anonymity. Part of that is that we make sure that the analytics are actually kind of independently done. I'm not a member of the administration or staff or anything like that. But we also applied some additional things. So when there is any cuts that go down into the data, Dr. Sinu Srinivasan, who teaches market research out at Stanford, has kind of created a guideline that says you need a minimum number of responses. And so when we looked at regions or at pastors, if a pastor among all of their congregations didn't hit that minimum threshold, which was 30, we didn't go down into those responses any further. We grabbed the answers, but those were only reported kind of at the regional level. So you had to have really a significant number of responses to help kind of protect and continue that in our responses. In addition, as we go through, I'll share a few of the qualitative comments. Whenever those are shared, if there's anything in them that might have, inadvertently given you a clue as to where they were from, that was the editing that was done. So, for example, if you gave the unique name that, we meet every week at, Smith's, Veterans Administration Hall. Well, there's probably not many congregations that meet there. I could tell from your comments where you were from, and so we take that out as that's brought forward in our reporting. The next one, and then on some of the qualitative remarks. So those were the numbers, the quantitative remarks. In the qualitative remarks, and this is, and I'll say this multiple times, this is one of the banners and the hallmarks of this year's data, is the comments are just so positive about local pastors and their wives and the amount of work and the service that they provide. It's just so much higher in going through the comments. And I ended up reading through the comments, I want to say 2 or 3 times. There was close to 4,000 comments that we were reading through. What is new this year is comments around needing around the meeting hall and where people meet or wanting to own a hall. That came through. One of the things that's been a theme for many years and continues to be a concern is the quality of speaking and the content of messages that our membership has. This is a consistent concern for attendees. When it comes to service in the church, many people consider themselves unable to serve, either due to age or distance from services or being homebound. That's also pretty consistent with what we've heard in prior years. And then lastly, and we'll go through this, many are unwilling to recommend others to come in contact with United Church of God, either because they don't think it's their role, they think that that's something that should go through the ministry, or they have concerns sometimes with the experience that they would get when they come to services, or certain components from seeing a change in the experience. So for example, they might recommend somebody go to the website, maybe read a Beyond Today magazine, look at one of the Beyond Today webcasts, but that when they then are brought to their local congregation, that experience maybe isn't as polished. Going back to either the content and the delivery of the messages, the hall that they meet in, or again, just personally not feeling like that's their role. So these are just kind of broad themes before we go into all of the data. So walking through just some of the data, the demographics of who participated. The majority of the respondents this time are from the United States. This year the survey was really directed towards the United States congregations. It wasn't really publicized or promoted for international attendees to respond, and definitely kind of got for the international members that heard that. Some of the comments came through about, you missed my congregation because I'm in Australia, or you missed my congregation because I'm in Canada. There's no international locations listed in the survey, the congregational list. It appears the survey wasn't meant for members outside the United States. So that was one of the changes that we did in the survey this year. Then walking through the respondents, this is pretty consistent. The respondents are still skewed to older members. Over 75% of the respondents are over the age of 40. And this is where I want to start showing kind of at the, in the data. You'll see at the bottom where the N says 2,477. So while we had over 3,000 respondents, only 2,477 answered the question. And then the margin of error is plus or minus 2.1%. So what that means is if I were to ask 100 people a particular question, and half of them answered it one way, half of them answered another, but we didn't have everybody in the United Church of God answer the survey, that means that answer would be off by 2.1% one way or the other. So it would have gone down, it would have either been 48 or 52%. Those are really good margin of error scores. When you look at presidential surveys or things like that, they're going to ask maybe 1,000 people to represent millions of people. So their margin of errors are usually typically much higher. So this is good. But the question here was just tell us your age range. And the buckets that we had this year, we gave them ranges instead of having them put in individual years. So that was 1 to 25, 26 to 40, 41 to 60, and over 60. And so we've also got 56% that were over the age of 60 responding, 28.9% between the ages of 40 and 60, and 4% between the ages of 1 to 25 responding in the survey. So again, it's skewed definitely older. This year, compared to other years, again, your gender, we had more females responding than males. This is pretty typical, a little bit more higher this year. And then just asking, are you baptized? And then further details on whether you might be a deacon or deaconess, part of the ministry, the paid ministry, or a local or ordained elder. So we had about 95% of the respondents were in fact baptized. And again, the majority in the last survey that we did, which was reported in August of 2017, was 79%. This year it's 81%, which is pretty comparable. And then the balance of those were people with ordinations. We also ask about how long they've been baptized, and this is a little bit busy. How long have you been baptized? How long have you been attending United Church of God? Over 60% of the respondents have been baptized for over 30 years, and over half of them have been here since United Church of God started, which is 25 years ago. So definitely what we see is kind of the length of baptism continues to go up. When you look at their age versus attending, obviously the ages of the respondents go up. One of the things that's nice in the age of respondent, you see just a little bit of going up in age, which means just again from 2017, we've got more people that are older that are responding or attending here. But again, the majority, over half of those that responded to the survey have been here since the beginning of United Church of God. There we go. So let's go into the data and what people said. I want to start off by explaining some keys to the data itself. I explained margin of error, which is a survey technique where you look at the confidence of the respondents, right? If you've got 1 million people, right, or if you've got 10,000 people and you ask 10 people what they think, the chances of those 10 people reflecting what all 10,000 people think is lower than if you were to have asked 100 people, is lower than if you'd asked 1,000 people. And so that's what margin of error is trying to help us understand, is when we asked the question based upon how many people are in what's called your universe, or the number of attendees or the population, versus the ones that responded, what's the ability of that question to accurately reflect larger perceptions? And that throughout here, again, is a very low margin of error, which gives us high degree of confidence in what the answers are. This year, the data was reported out using top 2 box instead of average. And so what top 2 box is, when I ask you on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with your ability to serve in the church? Top 2 box adds everybody who said a 4 or a 5 in those responses. We also included, this is one we've done for multiple years because it's a good comparator and it's actually a good forward-looking metric, something called Net Promoter Score. And this is the idea that when you ask someone, for example, how likely are you to recommend that somebody go to the United Church of God website to learn more about the church? You ask people their comfort in recommending. you take what are called all of the positives. These are the members that give high scores on this. You actually subtract all of the detractors, people who do 0, 1, 2, 3, and that gets us to our Net Promoter Score. And I'll review that again when we get it to the data. The average Net Promoter Score for most organizations, especially when you benchmark against nonprofit, is about 5 to 10. In here, best-in-class organizations, including nonprofits, are in a 50 to 80 mark for this. The last one we wanted to talk about, I mentioned kind of the rosy picture that we have in the data here, something called skew. Survey data typically has a symmetrical bell curve in it. If I go out and I ask people, how happy are you with the oil change you got in your car? Right? You're going to get some group of people that's really, really happy, and you're going to get some people that really aren't happy. And when you add all of that up, there should be a natural curve in the responses. When you start to see kind of what the bias inside of that, you'll get skews in here where instead of a natural curve, which you can see in the middle, it either bunches all the way to one side, positive, or all the way to the other side, negative. And in this year's data, it floats a little bit more positive. And the example I was sharing the other night is if we were to ask people about going to the feast, right? The feast is a wonderful blessing that we have. And so one would expect in the church, if you ask people about the feast, lots of people are going to give it a really good score, right? However, is every single feast your absolute best feast ever? You know, some of them, for different reasons, are better than other feasts, okay? What if I were to give you a dozen puppies and now say, which of these puppies are the cutest, right? You're still going to have some people who say, if I force you to say some of these puppies are cuter than the other, you can still, inside of positive results, something that's got really great information, you can still say inside of that, some of these people are going to look at as more positive. So just something to be aware of in the data, that we're very polite, positive people inside the data. The survey itself was administered this year between January 9th and January 26th. Again, just a reminder, this is well before most people had heard of coronavirus, had heard of, you know, economic, stay at home, all of this stuff that we're working with. For those of you that aren't here, we've got people in the studio with masks, you know, spread out, a number of people online, just to continue to respect that. So inside the data, there's a handful of groups of data. High level, we asked questions about the environment and the feel of the local congregation. And as I mentioned before, new to this year is the degree to which the meeting hall and the request to own a meeting hall have been increased. So we're going to be reporting. I mentioned a little bit about skew we've done. We're not going to focus on it here, but the taller ones are just kind of the top two boxes as stated. The second bars are then putting that adjustment to kind of get that natural curve back into the data and helping us see where some of the differences are. So let's jump into the data. A few things that we do is we look at the data. The first score here, question is, I find the fellowship in my congregation to be uplifting and enjoyable. The margin of error plus or minus 2%, so that's that first 88%. And we broke out the data in a number of different ways. In the green, we've got the dark green are those that are non-ordained. 95.8% are those that are ordained, so deacons, deaconesses, elders. We also broke it down by age. So the blue in the center is on the left, those that are under the age of 40. The darker blue is those over the age of 40. We also broke out the data by regions. Remember, I talked about breaking out the data, but only doing it at a very broad regional level. So within the United States, we have purple, which is northwest, kind of green, that's the north central region, light purple, that's the northeast, blue, that's the southwest, green, that's south central, purple, that's southeast, green, that's international, and then on the far right, undisclosed dark purple. Those are the ones that did not indicate where they were at. And as I've been kind of looking through the data, that's actually one that I watch as I go through the data. Is what did the group that didn't identify where they were from, what are their answers as opposed to kind of when I compare that on the far right to the far left. But as we look at this, of the elements related to the environment of the congregation, fellowship really is the strongest. When I look across all of those, there's a significant impact on satisfaction with United Church of God. So when I go through the qualitative comments, it's fellowship at services. And, for many of us, we've just started coming back to services, that it's that fellowship that really is one of the positives for United Church of God. And just sharing one of the the comments, we've got a larger congregation. So some of the people can get overlooked at times or seclude themselves, while others leave quickly after services or routinely. But there's a good core of fellowship for most of the people most of the time. So these are the kind of comments that people shared in response to this question. A couple of other things that came through in the survey comments. One of the comments said, the fellowship at times can feel as things might be too superficial and that deeper life happenings are not shared. So while it's great to talk about our kids and our grandkids, there's definitely some people who would like to have deeper conversations in fellowship about the messages and about, that iron sharpening iron. Another example is one member said, there's perhaps a handful of brethren with whom I can have conversations that go beyond, hi, how was your week? For a group that's supposed to be a spiritual family, conversations can sometimes be pretty superficial. On the other hand, someone shared that we're a close-knit family, eating a potluck and meal together every week after services, and prolonging the fellowshipping has truly contributed to our closeness. Some of us have formed special Bible study buddy relationships, which continually stirs up the spirit within us, just as it should. I'm also grateful to have been called by God and to be part of this congregation I'm with. The sermonette and sermons are always great, and I love the chats we have about them afterwards. So this is what really kind of came through in a number of the comments, is people really aspiring that this be at least a component of the fellowship we have when we're together at services. And just one other comment, fellowshipping sometimes can get a little off track for the types of conversations we should be having on Sabbath, which I think are fair and constructive comments. The brethren within my congregation care for me and treat me with Christian love and concern. They overall do a good job of doing this with a score of 89% on a top 2 box. But for those that weren't comfortable sharing what congregation we're with, that drops to 76%. That's over 15% of those that aren't feeling as embraced in their congregations. We've got, I wish I felt more of our congregation. I don't think there's a kind of care and concern for each other that there should be. Love means sacrifice, and people are willing to give as long as it's convenient, but not as a sacrifice, and especially toward the children. If they're an inconvenience, we need to be more focused on love and understanding and strengthening each other. A few more comments, and some of these, I read through all of these. It takes a lot of prayer some days to read through these. When you get comments that say, I wonder if anyone would know if I was dead or alive and didn't show up for services. We have people in our congregations that feel that. I feel that many in my congregation are loving and caring, and that there's some that are lacking in love. There's a number of people that I can ask how they're doing, and they respond almost nonstop, and rarely, if ever, do they actually ask about how I'm doing and my family. Some of the people that have the most trials seem to be more concerned about me and my family than those whose lives are going well. And your heart just feels. We've got people that absolutely share, I love our congregation. It's the epitome of love and support and harmony and family and friends that you would expect from God's people. What a blessing to be among them and worship with our great Father. This is what some people are experiencing, but clearly not everyone. And had a conversation on the way here. Surveys are imperfect instruments. And I think one of the challenges in surveys is, as a leader, when I'm looking in the data, your job is to lean into the hard things. You're looking for the spots where things aren't working. And so one of the things, and the thing that I really appreciate about this particular question is this is something that anybody in the membership can step in and do something about. You don't have to be ordained, you don't have to be a pastor, you don't have to be a part of the administration to make sure that everybody is feeling engaged and cared for in their congregation. On the next one, the question, the environment of my congregation promotes personal and spiritual growth. 80% overall. In here, the scores come down a little bit. The scores indicate congregations are good for kind of interpersonal and social connections, but maybe less effective in fostering that spiritual growth. One of the comments in here says the reason I didn't rate completely agree is because while the church is warm and friendly to the members of the congregation, the members can be rather standoffish and cold-shouldered to new members or members of other congregations. Right? And so, I remember the example of someone where it was a little bit smaller at the feast, but smaller group at the feast, maybe 50 people, right? And you get done with services and everybody gets up and talking and stuff like that. And great example that someone shared of, they really made it a point, about 5 minutes after church to look at who was just still sitting at their seat and not talking to anybody and go up to them. And you can argue, he who seeks to have friends must first show themselves friendly, but some people, that's not their gift. They're quieter, they're more introverted, they still want to be connected. And so again, it doesn't have to be the pastor, it doesn't have to be the ordained. It's looking for the ones that, seem a little bit off to the side and really bring them in into not just connecting with the congregation, but connecting with the reason why we're there, right, with the Sabbath and messages. Moving on to the next content, most of the congregations are helpful. Members within my congregation help and support one another. 87%. One of the comments here, the congregation has always been welcoming and helpful to my needs. When I was just visiting the church occasionally before and became a member. The brethren and messages make me know that this is the right place to be for spiritual truth and love. And so, most of the members love and support one another. One of the comments in here was, regarding those who help and support one another, there's some who really stand out. This was one of the questions where, as I went through the comments and I was sharing them, in a great way, I actually had to be careful because the number of times people actually referenced their congregation, which again, I take as a positive. When you get into the qualitative comments and people get really specific on here's where I'm at, that's just an indicator of engagement that's good to see in the data. And so, someone shared, my church, Julie's Edit, is one of the strongest and most supportive churches I've ever attended. I feel more connected and close to the members there than any other church I've been to. Another one says, we've got a good congregation here. The brethren really help and support one another. Again, there's things that people want want there, though. Most of the members love and support one another. We do have a few in the congregation that are not loving or caring and sometimes difficult to get along with. You know, that it's a select problem, but not the entire congregation. You know, and that's what I appreciate about this section. You know, there's still things that we can do and we can do better. Transitioning a little bit into the messages that we're dealing with. First of all, asking that the sermonettes given in my congregation are suitable for visitors. One, there was a lot of kind of questioning on, and maybe some expectations or clarification that we could do around the purpose of services. You know, a lot of members go to congregations and they don't have visitors. And so, you know, why are you asking whether the sermonettes are suitable for visitors when we don't have visitors here? We haven't had visitors here in a couple of years. Shouldn't the messages be for those of us of the household of faith because we're the ones here? Yes, accommodate it for a visitor should they show up, but if that's not who's in my congregation of 18 of us that get together every week, you know, what are we looking for? Overwhelmingly, people recognize the very fine effort that a lot of our members are putting forth into their messages. But there is strong feedback that without some programmatic resources to help speakers develop, this area of services is really seen to be lacking. One of the comments is, I feel that the sermonette speakers need more formal training. Many of them are poorly organized with no main point or try to cover topics too vast for a sermonette. You know, I remember a quote by Winston Churchill that shorter is harder. You know, you can speak for an hour. It's a lot harder to get a point across in a concise period of time. Some of the other comments that came in were that, you know, I suggest that the home office take a leading role in teaching men what is the purpose of a sermonette, what subjects are appropriate, how does one give one effectively. Perhaps there could be video instructions via seminars that all potential sermonette givers would be required to watch. I mean, we've got this beautiful studio here. You know, maybe that's something. Other comments, you know, some of our sermonette speakers could benefit from public speaking instruction or classes or mentoring. The sermonettes are improving quite a bit as our pastor and several deacons are holding bi-weekly classes to address topics and presentation skills. I think that's... When we get to sermons, our sermons do tend to focus on attendees instead of visitors. The question was, the sermons given in my congregation are suitable for visitors. So again, the same comment holds forth as to a lot of our congregations don't have visitors, or if they have visitors, they're from other congregations. Again, further effort is expected in striking that balance between first-time or visitors versus longtime members in the church who really want to get a lot more meat and instruction in those particular messages. We also have a lot of comments on the style of our sermons and the engagement. So one of the comments was, you know, our pastors give sermons that are so boring and non-uplifting, it makes me wonder how anyone in the congregation even manages to stay awake. I don't believe a visitor would be able to gain much of anything from sermons that are so wrapped up in talking about Mr. Armstrong in the old days. You know, some of these comments are really, really direct. Other comments around this, I feel some of the speakers are not qualified to speak. Not all men are speakers. We have some that are really good, and then some that shouldn't be speaking at all. One of the greatest weaknesses of my congregation and most congregations is the quality and effectiveness of the weekly Sabbath messages, specifically the sermons. Training should be conducted or subsidized for all those given the responsibility to speak in order to help them develop the skills and tools to speak effectively and in line with basic principles of learning and development, not just present technically, doctrinally correct messages. I believe this is a key for the church to continue to grow and to properly feed not only those veterans in the church, but the newly converted. And so, what I want to be clear, these are a couple of comments, that the effort in the qualitative comments is absolutely recognized, that it's work to get these messages together. But there's definitely more work on how we're delivering them and how we're engaging with our audience. Looking at things, some of the comments talk about, you all know this, or back in Worldwide, and it's like, well, Worldwide was 25 years ago. We have a lot of people who never attended in Worldwide, whose only experience is United Church of God. That's the experience they have. Just one of the areas that could really use some focus and investment of resources to develop. So I've been going for a little bit. Again, what questions do you have on this? Yes, Peter.
So Julie, in general, the international responses are about 20 points less than the average. What do you put that down to? The international is generally being less happy on every question. Mm-hmm. What do you put that down to?
What I can tell in the qualitative is that in as much as in the United States, so first of all, let me repeat the question. In looking at the data consistently, the responses are showing that the international areas are lower, usually by about 15 to 20%, and what possibly could be the cause on that? It's that in as much as there are resources here, when you look at the questions, they start to get even more thin when I start to go to international areas. When you look at the international areas that did respond, even those were predominantly more English speaking, Australia, Canada, a little bit of the UK, some into Europe. There were certainly other areas, but again, we're getting even thinner on those that have the training or capability or ability, in this case, to speak and give messages. There we go. Yes?
Would you say there were enough responses from international to make it valid?
Yeah. If we put all of international together, good question. And the question was, do we have enough international to be valid? So when I add all of the responses together, we had 62 from international areas, which does kind of go over that threshold of 30 that I need to at least make a line of sight on it. Again, a lot of the non-English speaking are not in here, and again, the survey wasn't really promoted internationally. Some of the people just found it and answered anyway.
So would you explain how 30 is the benchmark when, if you have 1 million people or 20 million people and you only get 30, how can that be the same as?
It changes when you get 1 million people. So on this data set with the number that I have of 3,000, kind of the bare bones, if I've got to kind of put a finger to the wind, when is it you're starting to creep into pure speculative areas? Kind of the absolute, if you had to make a call, that number is 30 for our data set. And the question was, how did you get to that 30? So that was my calling a favor from a friend going, what's the lowest I can go?
Perhaps as a point of clarity, your margin of error with a lower sample size will be greater. However, we're able to look at details down to the 30-person level. You don't want to go any lower than that because otherwise you're really picking at straws. So your margin of error might be wider for that specific subset, but it is still valid to go down and dig at that depth.
Yeah.
But what if you only have 60 people in a congregation in a circuit and you get 29?
We didn't put them in.
But isn't that a pretty solid percentage?
You have to take a cut somewhere, right? And so the cut was 30, the margin of error goes up. But what we did was if it was 29, we just kept them at the regional level, right? Because when you get to 29, you're like, well, I got one that has 28, so why can't you do 28? And you just kind of creep down the rabbit hole. It's a good question. Why can't you do 29 instead of 30? Next up is we have a good variety and frequency of activities and socials. So this went down compared to a lot of the other responses. Usually in the qualitative, it was distance from services, the format of the socials, the frequency. Some of them see that the socials are unintentionally excluding groups, such as older singles, senior citizens, single parents, those with unconverted mates. They really want socials that everybody can participate, is what you kind of hear coming out of qualitative. One of the comments that someone shared was, our congregation keeps shrinking, which I find discouraging. We seldom have church activities or socials. Our meeting hall isn't suitable for potlucks, which I think adds to the problem. Right, so again, the importance of connection and working with people. This next one, and this is new. We've had comments before about meeting halls. There is a seismic shift in here regarding meeting halls. And the question was, our current meeting hall serves our local needs well. 80% agreed with that. Just a lot of comments about wanting to have their own facility or wanting consistent minimum standards because the experience really varies by geography. And I think I mentioned this, what a lot of them, not a lot, what some of the comments really reflect is that I go to the website, I watch a Beyond Today broadcast, and then I come into a hall that's dingy, that's dirty, it might not be in the best area of town. As we get to why are you willing to recommend, that's part of why, is that they're very concerned about the physical space that these meeting halls, and a number of members think that if they had their own hall, that would be solved. Now again, this is pre-pandemic, before social distancing and all of those elements, but that's just one of the kind of seismic changes in the comments here. One of the things that comes out in the comments is concern over spending on things like media at the expense of meeting halls. So there's a comment that says, we pay $75 a week for our hall, and the toilets leak, and it smells, and there's no place for mothers to take their kids, and it's dark, and yet we're watching all of this funds going into media. And and I get, those are very, very hard choices to make when the comparison they're making is not, if you look at media, and how much companies like my company spends on media, right? We don't spend hardly anything on media when you compare it to that, or even to other churches. That's not the comparison members are doing. They're doing the comparison between what kind of experience do I get in my hall. We don't have enough that we can save it for another hour so I can have a potluck once a week. But we've got, large amounts of money going to media. And again, expectations, I know a lot of those are actually not part of the budget, right? Those are donations that people are making happen, but it's still a perception that we need to consider. So then the last piece that I do, and this is just a little bit of my process, in that when we get all of these qualitative comments, you can read through them, but it's hard to just kind of distill the comments. And so as I go through them, I try to group them together on what's the main point. What is it that they're trying to express in these comments? And I do what's called coding. This comment is about sermonettes. This comment is about the meeting hall. This person seems overall very pleased with what they're getting within services, things like that. What we have is, the majority of the comments on this section of the survey, a little over 18%, are really pleased with what they're getting regarding the experience at services and the care. But the second biggest one, 15%, is dealing with, we need a better hall to meet in, or we want our own hall. This wasn't even on the survey as a material one on the last round in 2017. The next 11% are around socials, and then 10% on congregational care. I also want to just highlight, there's a number of comments throughout here on services being 90 minutes long. There's a comment that has said, the home office has directed that services be 90 minutes long, and yet ours are still 2 hours. People who are senior citizens going, I can't sit for 2 hours anymore. And I think there's a connection between the quality of the messages and the length of our services. as we get better at giving messages and organizing and structuring and deliver them, we'll be able to get to those points and those tighter. But again, going back to Winston Churchill, right? Shorter is harder. I definitely, certainly get that. So moving into the next section, we're now actually going to talk about messages and resources. Overall, good scores, some of the highest scores on topics that we ask in this particular round of surveys. Some of the comments in here, things like, I think the speakers here do an incredible job of giving solid, doctrinally sound messages covering a wide variety of topics. And yeah, I once read from the Home Office that services are supposed to be an hour and a half, yet they tend to consistently run 2 hours or more for my local church. And that comes up in some of the comments, just pulling that out. So when we look at pastors' messages, I'm satisfied with the messages that my pastor gives. 84%, those who did not indicate where they're from, it's 61. That's over 20 points lower in here. We get that they're just really particularly concerned, and that's 15% of our overall survey. That's a material group of people. One of the comments, pastor sermon delivery needs to be better organized so that the message flows from point to point and the body supportive of the SPS. Most of the time, it's difficult to make the connection from the SPS through the body. Also, the conclusions are more of an afterthought rather than a succinct message or wrap-up. Some of the other comments, my pastor always gives messages that demonstrate that he's given them much thought, and they're very encouraging because they're always applicable in some way to my situation in life. I even pass along some of his sermon links to my adult children who, although they're going God's way, are still in need of encouragement in their walk with him. But we also get comments like, I feel our pastor gives good messages. I rarely feel he gives amazing messages. They're often on very basic topics, which are good, and we need to cover those, but we're rarely challenged or rarely go deep and learn something where you can tell a tone of a well-thought-out research has been involved. The messages seem to be built more around some clever or kitschy intro and less about strong meat. They aren't bad, and I learn a bit from them, but rarely do I feel, wow, that was great. So there's just definitely, this is one of kind of the hallmarks of this is where a lot of people, their experience of what United Church of God, what church is the messages they get on a weekly basis. I'm satisfied with the messages that are given by other speakers in my congregation. This now drops, and when you look at the qualitative, this is where kind of what's in the data and how that's showing up and what's actually being fed in the results really kind of gets a little bit decoupled. So one of the comments, I think this is a really constructive one, I'd suggest that the Home Office take a leading role in teaching men, again, what the purpose of a sermonette, what the subjects are appropriate, and how to give one effectively. Perhaps there could be video instructions via seminar that potential sermonette givers would be required to take. So, mentioned that earlier. Some of the comments, they'll get really, really frank. Not all speakers are born speakers, but they try, and I'm inspired by their dedication. Our congregation recently started a spokesman club, which I think is very effective in both improving the quality of the messages as well as deepening the relationships among the men in the congregation. I've witnessed tremendous benefits from Spokesman's Club in other congregations I've attended as well, and I recommend the Home Office encourage more congregations to consider hosting a Spokesman's Club in their local area. Speaking is a gift or a hard-won skill, and many on the speaking schedule are not the most effective. Some of the speakers do their best, but the delivery needs some improvement. The message content, however, the messages that my pastor gives are doctrinally sound, and the scores are what we would expect to see, 90%. One of the comments, our pastor gives good messages overall. They're doctrinally sound, they adhere to the Bible more than mere traditions, and they're interesting and needful subjects. He also has a great deal of common sense, having held other jobs prior to becoming a pastor. So he has a more realistic view of how to be a Christian in the world than many pastors do. So the content of the messages, you get comments about, I'd like to hear more about prophecy, or I'd like to hear more about Christian practical living. But overall, really positive comments here. However, the message content for non-pastors has more concern. Really, when you look at all the comments, it's their understanding of who's in the audience sometimes. We have some that the messages have, it's difficult enough for me to sit through messages which are full of doctrinal errors. So that is happening sometimes. And I know there's mechanisms to deal with it, but it's still out there. One of the other comments was that I think sometimes the messages have a lot of church speak, and it would be difficult for a new person to hear. I don't think most people in the world have evil in their hearts when they keep Christmas. They're just living outside of wedlock, etc. They're just misguided, and we can be harsh, and sometimes, we're like that in our sermons and sermonettes. As someone who's recently joined the church, I can say there's a few times I've been personally offended. At the time, it was things I had no idea were pagan and was still doing those things. I walked away feeling attacked instead of encouraged. So, when we do have new people there, expecting them and giving them messages that say, well, people who still, eat clean and unclean meats, we all know this. Well, maybe not. We've been very blessed in our congregation in Philadelphia. We have a member who passed away earlier this year who hadn't been able to attend for probably about 18 months, but there was a point at which we were thinking of giving her a ride, letting her come back to church. And I was thinking to myself, she came back to church, she wouldn't know half the people in our congregation. How fantastic is that, right? But that also means half the people in your congregation probably may not know these things. And so making sure that we understand who's in our audience. We do have members who have unconverted mates, and when you're really critical about people who aren't in the church, you're talking about someone they love and who's their spouse. Not that we shouldn't be sharing that, but we need to be careful that we're speaking that in love. One of the great things that comes through for United Church of God is the wealth of Bible resources. This is really the website, the member site, the booklets. There continues to be, and this has been in the survey, at least for the last 5 rounds, refreshing on the Bible reading program. That's a great example of excellence in the material for members who've been in the church for a long time, wanting that rich, deeper content. A great comment here. We keep discovering more information on the United Church of God site. It's amazing. And I just discovered one can monitor Ambassador College courses online. There's endless articles, and I found there's doctrinal and study papers to read. This is all that one needs to utilize one's Bible, in addition to one's Bible, to seek in His Word. Other comments, I appreciate the plethora of Bible-related resources that United Church of God offers, especially the online sermons and Beyond Today program and Bible studies. Thank you very much for all of these. Some of the suggestions, I'd personally prefer longer, more in-depth papers on various subjects. I find most of the articles are written for new people. They're written very well. I'd prefer more in-depth. I feel United Church of God has great materials to help us understand and grow. The Bible reading program and the new Grace booklet are just 2 examples. So just one of the highlights. This is probably one of the highest scoring areas in the entire survey. I understand the fundamental truths of the Bible, certainly what we would hope to see, that having spent decades of studying and attending, most of the people are confident in their understanding of biblical truths. I feel like I can explain the fundamental truths of the Bible. I listen to sermons on the United Church of God website on my hour commute to work. I'm learning so many new things you just can't get from reading through the Bible. It makes me realize how much there is to learn. I have some self-doubt about how much I can or should be explaining to others when I have so much to learn, but I know we're all a work in progress. It's interesting to see people in your life, coworkers perhaps, that are a law unto themselves that puts you to shame sometimes, conducting themselves better than myself that knows the truth. So really, really positive outcomes here. When it comes to giving an answer, again, the scores are really, really high, but most are confident in their ability to explain, but they aren't taking the opportunity to. Again, they think that maybe that's something that the minister should do, or that programs in the home office do, but there's pockets of real positive progress in this area. So for example, for the past years, this is the fourth, our pastors created a workbook for us to help with our studies, and we have monthly quizzes which are corrected and returned. It includes a question. We have a doctrinal question asked by a fictitious Bob, and a group of us ladies get together and go over our tests. And then we go out for lunch, which is great spiritual congregation and encouragement. We covered the Fundamentals of Belief booklet in 2018, and so we're pretty good at explaining. So this now starts to connect those dots, right? Of, what is fellowship? Can we have those spiritual conversations? How do we foster doing that? Another example, we've been having in-home Bible studies once a month at our deacon/deaconess's home, in which we've been going through various scenarios where we discuss how best to give an answer to someone who asks about our beliefs, turning to scriptures. So again, very, very positive. This is the stuff that kind of warms my heart as I'm reading through the data each year. So as we wrap up this section, when you look at the responses, really the two biggest things, 21% on the content of messages, 21% on the quality of speaking, almost 40% are talking about what's going on with our messages and really having opportunities to take a step forward on that. One of the things I really love in this particular content, this 18% in Julie speak is Berean. The number of people that are saying things like, yeah, I study, but wow, I've just got so much more to learn. I need to spend more time in my Bible. That people have that humility and candor about what they're trying to do, I find just very, very encouraging. A number of comments here, and we didn't even ask about it, are very positive on their pastor and the messages they give and the resources that they're doing. Again, 90-minute services come up again. So think about the last section, which didn't even talk about services, and yet we had a whole group of people who thought to mention it there, and then it gets mentioned again here. So now we're going to transition into activities. We worked a little bit differently on the data here because not everybody, for example, can serve at camps. So what we did inside the data is we've got kind of overall serving in the congregation, but then the individual questions about, did you serve at a feast? Did you serve at a key event like a winter family weekend or something? Did you serve at camp? And we kind of combined those together to say, overall service in your congregations versus service that would happen in kind of some of these discrete events. So we've got that, and then we've got probably a little bit more work to do on when we're sharing about the church and our beliefs. And so the first one is about service. We've got, in the past year, were you able to serve or contribute in some capacity in your congregation? 88% did. But when we look into the qualitative, there's a lot of concern about the burdens falling on the same set of shoulders. I definitely want to compliment and give Mark Welch credit because he caught this on this, which is there, as you read through the qualitative, this is kind of, again, the disconnect between the quantitative and the qualitative that happened a little bit this year. when you read through the qualitative, a lot of people, not a lot, there are comments that the older members are continuing to shoulder the burden. The older members are doing a lot of the work, and yet when you break out the data, the overall average is 88%. When you look at the data of those that are under the age of 25, 93% say they're serving. A large portion, and I actually attribute it to this next point, a large portion of people associate service solely with large tasks such as speaking or leading a particular activity at service. So when you go through the qualitative and you ask about serving, they're like, well, you know, I'm older, I can't serve, right? Or I live too far from services and I can't serve, or I haven't been asked to speak. And those are ways that we serve, you know, but, and I think I've been inspired by some great examples in this pandemic. You hear from people. I've got a dear friend who's suffering with cancer, and she talks about all the cards she's getting from people she doesn't know from around the world, right? That's service. And you don't have to be 25 to do it. You don't have to be able to go to services every week. You know, and I've been, again, really inspired by some people who, you know, they're calling everybody to make sure they're okay every week. That's service still. So service isn't necessarily formal roles, and I think when you when you look at one of these comments, and this is from someone who's clearly younger, which in the terms of survey is likely under the age of 40, it says, you know, I'm often overlooked when an opportunity arises, either because of my lack of proficiency to perform certain tasks or my inability to make time when they choose to do something. They don't seem to give me many chances to serve. I love doing what I can in a small way. You know, there's comments like, I need to serve more, and that falls on me to work towards that. It's not because others aren't providing the opportunities, but I need to seek them out. We also have people that say, you know, I've offered to help serve in several capacities and been told help was not needed. We're good. That's hugely discouraging to people because they want to feel wanted. You know, I think that one of the conclusions in reading all of these is it's not just about providing the opportunity, but helping them connect the dots. You know, they could help in the kitchen if they wanted, but nobody's asked them. And they see the people that have been doing it for years and they're intimidated, right? Or they see that it's so done a certain way that we're not flexible to other ways that it's gonna get done. I mean, I'm sorry, but for crying out loud, who cares which end of the table you put the napkins? You know? And yet I've heard people, they won't try because they got sniped because they put the napkins on the wrong end of the table. So it's giving that, knowing the opportunity and saying, you know, going to the younger kids, I love seeing this in kind. You know, hey, what do you want to go on a scavenger hunt? Go pick up all the hymnals. Right? But sometimes you have to connect the dots in that. So sometimes the opportunities are there. It's asking for the direction inside of that. When we get to the feast, were you able to serve in the feast at some capacity? The numbers are going to come down because not as many people can. Get great comments. You know, serving at the feast is so rewarding. Being able to meet new people and interact with them, as well as getting to know new ministers and learn from them. Serving in any capacity makes one feel that they're doing good to others, as well as receiving back awesome blessings. But then you get people, I volunteered to help at the feast site I attended, but due to the high attendance was not needed. You know, and then you've probably got somebody else at the feast that hardly sees their family because they're working so hard. So we've got to work out some of that bunchiness. Again, you know, what is the service? Sometimes the service is finding the people that are sitting there on their own and pulling them into your family, pulling them into, you know, making sure they feel connected at the feast. At regional events, the camps, that's obviously fewer opportunities. Unfortunately, this summer we won't have as many camps to serve at. In the past year, were you able to serve in some capacity at a UIC teen or preteen camp? There's some frustration that it's the same group of people that are doing this every year, and there's other people that want to, but again, there's not slots for them. I applied as a volunteer for a camp and was not accepted because there were too many offers for helping people with previous experience that were given preference. And this really hurt. So somebody was hurt because we couldn't find a way to let them engage at camps. How am I going to get experience if I'm not given an opportunity to serve? I needed the opportunity to be around people because this person lives far away from a congregation. So again, the connecting people inside the services. So when I kind of pull all this up, we've got half the attendees are serving in one way in events like Feast, regional camps, regional events, or camps. There we go. When the picture really changes when we get to in the past year, have you discussed your beliefs with anyone outside the church? And the qualitative here really, there's a number of factors that come out in the qualitative here. I think accurately, a lot of people recognize that there's a lot of people that don't want to. Most people just don't want to, right? They're kind of, people at the grocery store, people that I work with. We're in a society where a lot of people don't talk about their faith and their religion as much as others. So there's that. There is kind of a reluctance to, that's what the Beyond Today, that's what the ministry does, that's what the ordained do, or they don't believe they've had an opportunity to. And so the example here, when it comes to sharing church publications or discussing my beliefs about God to those in the world, it simply doesn't happen. Religion to them is frowned upon as foolishness. In my 50-plus years in the church, I've only had one person approach me with a sincere question about our beliefs to do with, I believe, Valentine's Day. Bringing up religion to those in my part of the world usually results in uncomfortable debating back and forth that becomes arguing. I personally avoid the subject of religion and politics with anyone. If someone were to decide sincerely to ask me something, I would happily comply. So they're, checking to make sure that somebody sincerely wants to have that particular conversation. One example, though, out of the comments that I appreciate, I don't typically share the literature if I've had a conversation about the relevance of God's laws in Christian life. I typically just share a few verses, maybe sprinkle in some Christmas, Easter truths, and then the individual can do whatever they need with that information. I went to the internet when I wanted to know more, and I think if somebody really wants to know, they'll Google it. Right? So, but I like that example of, maybe sprinkle in a scripture, sprinkle in phrases from scripture. You don't even have to tell them you're quoting a scripture. You just sprinkle in those phrases when you have opportunity to do so. When it comes to, in the past year, have you shared any printed United Church of God publications with others, either personally or via a waiting room style dispersal? The numbers come way, way, way down. A lot don't think it's their place to do so because they actually think that would usurp God's role in calling. Or, they're uncomfortable with actually sharing the information. So one of the things that comes out very clearly in the qualitative is it's, at least on this, sharing the publications, it's not because they don't know they can. It's there's something beyond that, whether it's the person they're sharing with the materials that they have to share, that they're not comfortable doing it. So people are clearly aware that they could do that share some booklets or things like that. The other one, and I think this is more of an awareness thing, is in the past year, have you shared any UCG materials via social media? Some of them are concerned, based upon who they're connected with, maybe they've got family members that aren't in the church, that they're going to create offense by the content they're sharing. Others, and I brought this up earlier, are concerned that if the materials result in a request to attend services, the local experience is going to be disappointing. And this is a comment that just struck me. The church uses bait and switch marketing, where we have modern appealing media campaigns with the Beyond Today program, but then our actual services are church services are a blast from the past. There are comments that are also, I didn't know I could share United Church of God material via social media. So there's definitely an awareness piece inside of this question. Another comment was, I think social media can be used as a great tool for spreading the truth of the Bible, and all members should be encouraged to be brave enough to post sermons and Beyond Today messages or material. So it's there. I think this is just because it's a little bit newer of sharing inside of social media. And then the last one, over the past year, have you been satisfied with your level of service in the church? These numbers definitely come up. Most are satisfied with service. They're just concerned that our efforts to preach the gospel may be, essentially the focus and the investment there may have gone a little bit at the expense of caring for the members themselves. And so you start seeing, and this is a theme that's going to start unfolding as we get into the next section, the church has had a significant issue with spreading the ministry too thin, which starves the brethren in the local congregations. So while we may be declaring the gospel in several ways, it's not feeding the flock well enough. So you're spending too much on, and again, this is a perception, too much on preaching the gospel and maybe a little bit too little on the latter. The website content for the members is one thing, but access to the ministry who barely have a free moment because they're managing too many congregations is rare. And we're spread out. I mean, this is the reality of what we're dealing with. And I hope it was clear from the beginning, some of this is pretty direct feedback on this. When we look at the qualitative, this is the one that struck me. 34% of people say they're unable to serve. And I think part of that is our perception of what is service. Is service standing up and giving a message? Or is service remembering someone who maybe lost their father earlier this year and reaching out to him on Father's Day and saying, hey, just knowing this is your first Father's Day without your dad, I'm thinking of you. Right? Reaching out a couple years later and going, I know you lost your mom, Mother's Day must be hard. Right? That's service too. That, again, is stuff that you don't have to be ordained to do. It's not speaking. It's not just ushering. It's not just doing the kitchen. And who knows, I'm not great at humor, but what we're looking at when we come together, we're not going to have a kitchen anyway, because we're dealing with the outcome of the pandemic for a while. So we're going to have to figure out other ways. The next section, I believe this is getting close to the latter sections, summary of relationship with our pastor. These scores are really much, much stronger. This is the highest I've ever seen since doing this since 2008. And that just because they're working so hard, and I know how much is on their plates, was really, really encouraged to see how much this was recognized in the survey data. So the question is, my pastor is available for anointing, counseling, or visiting when I need him, 84%. But again, those who didn't feel comfortable identifying what congregation they're in, that drops to 54%. So somehow there's a disconnect. The distance, there's a lot in the qualitative where, I don't know what the opposite of catch-22 is. where members see how hard their ministers are working and they'd like to ask for help, but they're so aware of how thin they're spread, so they don't ask for help. I mean, they're trying to be considerate, but then at the same time, when you're saying, do you need it? Well, not really. But it's because they're kind of self-filtering and self-governing. I love my pastor, but he's so busy that he doesn't have time for us and doesn't seem to see the problems in our congregation. I know he cares for me, but the lack of time and sight hurts a lot. Although my pastor has more on his plate than most people could handle, I think he does an excellent job. However, I do worry he's being asked to do too much. Our pastor's always so busy with many congregations, and sometimes I feel like I'm infringing on his time. It's hard to share much about what's going on with me when I hear frequently, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. So, I mean, we're just aware, and I think this is just part of the era that we're in, and the trials and what we're dealing with as a church at this time. There we go. The next question was, my pastor genuinely cares for me. This score certainly went up. Our pastor's taken great strides over the past couple of years to come out of his comfort zone. He's more of an introvert than an extrovert, and this has been greatly appreciated. He's very successful in making sure that our congregation is well informed and appreciative of anyone who serves in the church. Another comment, he's a breath of fresh air and very personable with all the church brethren, dearly cares for the elderly, of which we have a lot of. We have a caring pastor. He reminds us to stay close to God every Sabbath and has a very caring wife. We're thankful to him and his wife. But there are some, again, definitely in here, my pastor doesn't make much of an effort to get to know me. I've been attending for about 6 months now, and the only time I've spoken with the minister was for 5 minutes at a church picnic. He does most of his speaking with his elite few who run the regime. I don't dislike him. I think he's good, just doesn't allow people to breathe. And those are ones where it's like, these are the quiet ones. These are the ones that won't tell you what congregation they go to. Who are the ones that leave right away, sit by themselves, don't seem to naturally get pulled into the congregation at church picnics. Broad coverage. The next one is my pastor has a good pulse on the congregation and is aware of our needs. This is really the lower scores here, I think, especially, and it's consistent with the qualitative, is really because of how thin they are and not having enough time on the Sabbath with congregations to really observe and visit what's going on. Comments like the pastor's very busy and spread very thin and doesn't know all that would be going on because they aren't there. It would just be nice to have the pastor there more often. Just very, very, kind of thin spread, and that gets reflected in we know there's things going on and leaning sometimes maybe on the local leadership. My pastor returns my emails and phone calls in a timely manner. Again, it's, pastors, some of them have full-time jobs. They're not accessible. They do the best they can, and that's the thing. Please take from these comments. People very much recognize what is all on their plate and the effort and the heart trying behind that in an insurmountable task. On the other hand, we've got, my pastor's never phoned me or visited despite my invitation. My only communication's been via email, i.e. generic weekly emails or a specific email of correction. And you just keep thinking through, in the organization I have, is like, am I communicating with everybody, but am I personally connecting with every single person, that's kind of on the team and feeling like they're engaged. The pastors do have strong interpersonal skills. When I speak to my pastor, he gives me his full attention. For the most part, at 89%, rightly so, our pastors are people, and they're very, very good at this. However, our pastor is a great motivator and encourages all to serve and is a wonderful servant. There's a few times when I've caught him when he has other things that have to take priority. And so other than that, yes, he gives me my full attention and we have a really good relationship. And I get that. It's hard to do when you've got this whole checklist in the back of your brain of what else you've got to get to and do, and someone's got something for you. The next question, my pastor has to connect with people of all ages within our congregation. Again, good scores. It's clear in the qualitative that the ministry is working hard to treat each of the attendee as an individual, regardless of age. The comment, my pastor cares about me and my family. He always wants to know about each of my children, and I feel I can call and talk to him about anything. I feel his love for God and his congregations. This is one that, again, there's a little bit of a disconnect in the data and the qualitative. So the data talks about my pastor is careful to avoid discussing his personal political views during the church service. And for the most part, 88%, for the most part, that is absolutely true. And lots of comments about, I truly appreciate how our pastor always points back to the Bible as the basis for his answers when interacting with our congregation. I do feel some of the prophecy easily crosses into politics, but remains controlled and redirected to the Bible. That being said, when you get to some of the other speakers, and when you get to what people are seeing members put on social media, there is a lot of concern in the qualitative comments. One of them says, I think everyone needs a reminder that being politically conservative is completely unrelated to having traditional conservative values. We've got elders continuing to post about one party or another out on Facebook. I worry about their salvation. When I hear more about politics or see more about politics from people than about the Bible. And it's making people in the congregation uncomfortable, especially newer members who are afraid to say that it makes them uncomfortable. So this is something that, it's saying like kind of in the sermons themselves, we're doing well. What the qualitative is saying is when I step outside of that, there's a number of people that are concerned. I also want to, as we get to the end here, end on kind of a really positive note. My pastor is positive, upbeat, and encouraging, and at 89% top 2 box, it's a really, really great score. Despite all the challenges, despite everything that they have in their role and in the church and in the world, the pastors are mostly upbeat and very admired for their service, right? My pastor and his wife couldn't be kinder, more involved, or available to the brethren. They're not respecters of persons and encourage and include everyone. My pastor's optimism and encouragement never fails to inspire me, and I truly feel comfortable talking about any questions here. This is, when I read through the comments, because some of them are really direct, the term I use at work is energized. This is the section I come back to kind of build back up that, you see and I could go for pages and pages and pages about my pastor is a godly man and a good shepherd. I love the pastor and his wife. You can tell they truly love us and care. I couldn't ask for a better pastor. Our pastor is one of the most humble and serving people I've ever met. We're very blessed to have him and his wife with us. Just wonderful, wonderful pages of that. And so that's an important foundation to have as you do a congregational survey. When we look at the qualitative, right, it's almost half of, when we got to the section and we asked people what they thought, almost half of them used that as an opportunity to share about the great work their pastor is doing, and passed along, a lot of this feedback inside of it. A number of them, the biggest concern beyond that is that they're just too busy. And we certainly understand that with the resources we have. And so as we kind of wrap up I believe the second to last thing we want to look at is a score called Net Promoter Score. I mentioned this earlier. And Net Promoter Score, we asked the question, how willing are you to recommend contact with United Church of God to non-members? The scores we have are largely driven by the experience in the local congregation. And so again, what you do is we ask, 1 being low, 10 being high. You take the people that are called promoters that have those highest scores, and then you take all of what are called the passives, so maybe it gave you a 5 or a 6, and the detractors, and you subtract them. And as you can see, one of the things you can end up with is actually negative scores. Because if you have more passives or detractors than promoters, you definitely can have negative scores in there. And so overall our score, so the benchmark, good is usually typically a score between 0 to 30. Great is 30 to 70. Growth are organizations that are over 70. And successful organizations are usually over 50%. So we're doing good at 30, or I'm sorry, we went down, we're at 28 for 2020. The last survey, 2017, was at 32%. Some of the things that are important to see in here is that when you look at the ordained in 2017 and the ordained in 2020, which are the middle and the right-hand green bars, it actually went up. So you want the people who are preaching, you want the people who are serving in the ministry to be positive about your organization. But for me, one of the concerns in this data is that the people under the age of 14 gave a score of 14. That they're that much farther behind those that are over the age of 40, which is, again, kind of the future and the growth that can happen in the organization. Again, when you get to the people who aren't comfortable sharing where they're from, those scores come down. There's a couple of spaces in here where, conversations about the programs and what we're doing, this gives you kind of some clear direction on that. And so when we ask just anything else you want to add, there are a number of comments about preaching the gospel, about and being really positive about the experience they're getting with United Church of God. 90-minute services, guys, came up again. Statistically significant. Feeding the flock in here is probably going to transition into, as we get to the end of this. And so I really, again, walking through this, when you get to read the thoughts of the people that I go to church with, yes, we've got things to do, but at the same time, I so admire the people whose comments I read. I have no idea who they are. I meet them in church, but I don't know who respondents are inside of here. But that, to me, it's a very, very precious thing to hear people share that. I had a former boss who said, it's not when the soldiers complain, it's when they stop complaining, because then they've given up. And that's what I see, is that there's comments in here and they're direct, but we really want this to be better because what this is so precious to all of us. And so if I were to kind of sum up some things to look at as you look at all the qualitative comments and what the data is saying, there's really, in my opinion, kind of 5 areas to really focus in on. The first one is really focusing on improving speaking. However those programs are done, it's been a theme in prior years. It's starting to really get to a critical mass that's impeding some people from either considering inviting people to church or having connections with United Church of God. Some of them think it's impeding them being members, right? That I'm not getting fed when I'm at church. So programs, this is part of the strategic planning process. Programs that really work on that and take a careful look at it. And it's hard work. We haven't had these programs, and now that we're distant, it makes it even harder. So that would be the first one, is as I look at the data, if I put my corporate hat on, if I look at when I was at a market research firm and they said, okay, Julie, all this data, what should we go do? Wow, you guys got to come up with a program on speaking for every single speaker. People need to, if you're speaking, I do this, it's worse than going to the dentist, is listen to my own presentations. It's the best way for me to get better. The second one is there's absolutely an imperative around our physical meeting halls. And I get that some services are coming back, but whether it's owning our own halls or making sure that there's a very clear minimum standard of the physical facilities that we are holding church in is also a barrier. We have members who will not come to local services because they are not comfortable with where we are meeting. And I know that that's a challenge, right? That our congregation is blessed to meet in a hotel, but you know what? If you're a visitor and we don't keep Christmas and you go to a hotel and you walk through the lobby past a Christmas tree, kind of confusing, is what one of the people said. So that's a second thing that was just, it's new this year, and the degree of it really is pronounced. There is clearly a tone in here when we look at the mission of the church to preach the gospel and prepare a people, that there is a perception that we are overly focusing on preaching the gospel at the expense of preparing a people. That the resources, that the reason they don't have enough ministers, that the reason we don't have these halls, that the reason we don't have richer resources for our brethren is at the expense of what's being done more centrally. And these are hard choices to make. I don't have to make these choices. So it's a perception of how do we adjust that in an organization that doesn't have the resources that it had 25 years ago. And it's a really, really hard thing to do. I think part of the answer is remembering that part of preparing a people you can do, but part of that is my fourth point of what is it that we do, the opportunity for congregations, right? That service is not just speaking. Service is picking up the phone and calling people you don't always call, or sending cards, making sure that they're getting pulled into congregations, right? That's part of this experience of preparing a people, is when the fellowship at church is about the sermon sometimes. Yes, ask about their kids, but ask about their trials. And in that way, we become a little bit of the iron sharpening iron that is preparing a people. So, and forgive me, I saw, Peter, you had had a question.
Yeah, regarding the church halls versus preaching the gospel, did you get the impression that most people think we spend most of our budget on preaching the gospel?
Yes.
When it's actually 25% or less each year of the whole church budget, but they think it's more than that. Yes.
Yeah, so the question is, when members are, or when the attendees, the survey respondents are talking about wanting more for preparing a people, is it because they think that the majority of the budget is spent kind of on preaching the gospel when that's only 25% of the budget? And the answer is absolutely yes, because they're looking, again, more finitely. And the example I gave is, there's a church that spends $75 a week on their hall. And it's, from what it says in the remarks, it's not a very nice place to meet. And then they see thousands of dollars happening over here. And I get that that bucket of money is not sufficient either. But, when you look at that and go, if you could literally just double that, you're not talking, they're not asking to buy a building, right, which is tens of thousands of dollars. They're asking for just a little bit more in their experience. I also get that a lot of that preparing of people probably goes into minister salaries. So again, it's a perception, and it's a tricky one on expectations. So
I might just say, we're certainly okay with them spending more money to have a decent hall.
yeah,
And I addressed that in the last e-news, I think, because we want people to have a nice environment in which to worship God. So there may be some misperceptions, but it is a joint effort where the pastor and the members go out and find a hall that is suitable.
and that's not always easy. So the comment is, we're certainly supportive of having people, local congregations spend more to have a decent hall. And again, this is from February, and it sounds like you addressed that in your last e-newsletter. But yeah, absolutely, we can do that. So again, 1, improve speaking. 2, looking at the meeting halls. 3, balancing that prepare a people versus preaching the gospel. 4 is, again, all the members, attendees can do this, right? What is the caliber of your conversation on the Sabbath? What is in fact service? And finding the things that you can do as a congregation to serve and have rich conversations. And then the last one is, as a theme, the appreciation for the ministry in the field and the work that they do, but at the same time, a very real concern about how much is on their plates. And them being overworked. And quite frankly, possibly an opportunity around adjusting expectations. We're looking at, a global economic pandemic-induced collapse. My company is being very careful about the business is scaling back this much, and so we're going to scale back this much. And that means me having hard conversations at work about things that we aren't able to do anymore. And I wish I could. And maybe there's an opportunity to go, we can't do that anymore. And you're absolutely right, we should be able to do that. We would love to have the resources to have every congregation have their own pastor. But there's absolutely a theme around the hard work that the ministers and their wives are doing, as well as just the resources and how thin and how much is on their plates and that they're being expected to do. So with that, I want to wrap up this portion of the presentation. Again, I want to thank the home office, Nathan Ekema, for doing the quantitative work. Certainly made it a lot easier for me. I can do it. It's not my favorite. He can do it. He likes it better than dealing with the qualitative, so it's a good team effort. I also want to thank, I think the example that Mark Welch has given of taking some of the data and not only sharing the data, but some of the comments recently, that's not been done before. And of course, the opportunity to share it here. It really, at the end of the day, you kind of work through the valley of all the critical comments and you come out the other side and go, you know what, it's still God in charge of his church. It's still all of his people trying, to get to the wedding supper of the Lamb, and us trying to help each other get there as the household of faith that God wants. So thank you for the opportunity this morning, and I will open it up for any additional questions or whatever we need. Thank you.